I guess I get to start the meeting. If you want to call it in order, I'll start the meeting with an introduction of Chip Harrod, who's an acquaintance of mine since the 90s. When he was at the time an executive director of an organization that no longer exists, National Conference for Christians and Jews, NCCJ as it was known then, and subsequently evolving into a lot of other similarly oriented, philosophically, organizations. But when we knew one another, he was the executive director of an organization whose employees, I believe, were employees of the United Way. You were an agency at that time, funded?
No, we were always independent.
You were independent, but they...
Affiliated with National. Yeah.
Okay, and had employees, though, that worked with an organization, the Cincinnati Association, in equity issues. We had called ourselves a diversity committee at the time, and from that point on, we followed one another's careers over the years. But at this point in history, I have the unique privilege of introducing Chip as a graduate of Greenhills High School in 1966. The yearbook that was published at that time is on the right side of the table, or left side of the table up here, showing pictures of him in the senior class and his senior class resume. That's on the screen here. This shows a wide variety of affiliations that Chip engaged in while in high school. 4 years in a row in tennis, along with musical performing groups and other athletic and other intellectual activities like the chess club. Chip, nonetheless, got to know Pete Patterson, who was his coach. In one of the years of those 4, I don't think it was all 4, but from the yearbooks that I've looked through that Pete provided for the purpose of reviewing his and Chip's careers, it points out that Pete was his sophomore tennis coach, maybe even his freshman, but because he did all 4 years, he had other coaches, and Pete left that school system at one point and did not remain coaching either. However, you can see from this resume that Chip had a variety of affiliations, and that prepared him for his future roles, no doubt, which he's going to tell us about today. Just for information, his senior class in Green Hills in that year had 222 students in it, 1966. That was in between the years when the white building was the high school class building and the new high school building that was to be constructed in Forest Park. In 66, there was only one high school. He was there at that time. And one of the officers of 2 classes, the junior class and the sophomore class. So we are honored that Chip and I have remained acquaintances in a similar calling in our careers, and the National Underground Railroad Treatise Center was one that got world recognition, most recently being identified as one of the 4 Cincinnati museums that are named among the best in the United States. Congratulations, Chip. I'm going to leave it at that and turn it over to Chip.
Well, thank you. And Pete, it's wonderful seeing you again. It's been too long. And I spent about, pardon me?
You played a year of football.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And
You need this too.
okay. Is that better? Okay. All right. Well, I must confess, I have this has really gendered in me a sense of nostalgia that I really haven't felt in quite a while. at the age of 76, I'm still working full-time. And so I really have not had much time to reflect on my past. And this opportunity, this privilege to be with you is kind of prompting me to try to look back at a few things so I can tell you a little bit about what I've done, and never by myself, always in the company of some really caring and righteous people. And so, but I'll endeavor to try to, and then I'll identify a few matters that I've been involved in, and kind of let you pick which ones you'd like me to kind of talk about. Yeah, we lived on Ingram Road from 62 to I think 73, 74, during which time I went to high school, college years, et cetera. And then my parents moved to Forest Park on Waycross, I think in 74, something like that. I have a sister, Becky, who graduated a year behind me, which is to be remembered to you all. And then I have a younger brother, 13 years younger, Matthew, who is a band director in Indiana. So my dad was city editor of the Enquirer throughout the 60s, early 70s. And we had moved here from a small town called Circleville, south of Columbus. And so we lived, we moved to Greenhills because my parents loved the golf course. And they were avid golfers, and so we moved here in Pleasant Ridge for my 8th grade year. And because they were avid golfers and they loved the school system, we moved out to Greenhills after 1 year. Spent some really enjoyable years here. I will say that the most memorable thing in my early tenure in Greenhills was, sadly, the murder of Patty Rebholz that took place about 6 doors down from where we lived. And the principals in that matter, and Mike Waring, one among them, was a football teammate of mine in a freshman year. My dad covered that murder and worked closely with the chief of police doing the investigative reporting. So that was after my first year of school, this is what I was introduced to. But fortunately, it was the only tragedy that really happened during my tenure. And it was something that was certainly memorable. Patty and I knew each other, and she was a wonderful cheerleader and really just a vivacious young woman, and it was just tragic. So, moving on. After Greenhills, I went to Franklin College, Indiana, and then went on to Xavier to get a master's in American history, and then eventually law school at Chase. I have been working in human relations work for a half-century. A lot has happened in our society in that period of time. Many groups have vied for inclusion at the table, if you will. And over this half-century, I have seen women, gays, immigrants, women, all vying for inclusion, all vying for a measure of equity. I have had the real privilege of allying with those groups and helping them to feel included in society. I did that for the most part as the director of a human relations organization, the National Conference of Christians and Jews. It's a civic organization that was founded by Christians and Jews back in 1927, and then here in 1944. Briefly, I was drafted out of college. I had a number of 71, so I was drafted. So when I got out of the Army, I was ETS'd, as they called it, in Europe. Traveled around with a motorcycle for a brief period, came back, had a history degree, but no teaching certificate, so it was virtually worthless. And so I didn't know what I was going to do. One of my dad's reporters said, "Bob, I think the National Conference of Christians and Jews is looking for a young associate." And so I had been involved in human relations work, even in the Army. I represented my company in on the battalion's Human Relations Council. Why, I don't know, to be honest with you. There was no credentials involved. I guess the commander just thought I might be helpful in that role. So that kind of launched me into the human relations work, believe it or not. So I met with then the director of the NCCJ, and fortunately he had very low standards, and I got the job, as the young assistant director. And my first job was to work on police community relations. We had camps out of Camp Joy and Camp Kern for low-income inner-city children, primarily African-American teenagers. We would go out for 4 days with Cincinnati police officers to help them develop relationships, to help the young men, for the most part, appreciate the work of officers, the role they play, and frankly, to give the officers a chance to see young people in a different light. And so we did a lot of that. And then, so I did that kind of, and then I did a lot of dialogues, interfaith dialogues, facilitated those. Again, not with any formal training. I was just kind of thrust in that role, and I guess I was a decent listener and was able to kind of lead some of those. In '77, I was given the executive directorship of the Louisville NCCJ and spent 2.5 years down there as their director. And didn't know anybody, but I had some really nice friends who helped me out, like Barry Bingham Sr. of the Louisville Courier-Journal fame and a few others that helped me become acquainted with Louisville. And had Colonel Sanders at my first annual dinner. And what a character. I remember going out to KFC corporate headquarters to interview him, and that was a trip. But he was just a delightful gentleman, and so he was the kind of the star of my first annual dinner down there. And so down there, I worked on police community relations again, worked on race relations. This was right after the desegregation of Louisville. And Dixie Highway was pretty much a hotbed of a lot of racial tension. So I happened to be down there a year after the court order to desegregate. So that was an interesting time. So I spent 2.5 years in Louisville and started law school in the evening, and transferred up to Cincinnati in '79, worked for the Human Relations Commission on police community relations, and I investigated cross burnings and hate crimes, and I would report those to Cincinnati City Council. And then I'd go out and work with the community, try to mediate some of the concerns that residents had, and police officers in turn as well. So I did that for until I passed the bar. Our twins were born 2 weeks before the bar exam. It's an absolute miracle that I passed. And but somehow I passed the bar exam. In '84, I practiced law for a year, and then was invited to come back to the NCCJ. And my former boss, who was retiring, asked me if I'd be willing to do that. And so I met with some of the senior partners of law firms, and they said, "Chip, do you want to be one of 5,000 attorneys, or do you want to be the NCCJ director?" So after talking to my wife, it was an easy decision. I could keep my hand in the law if I wanted to, but still, I was able to work, I guess, where my passion was, and has been all this time. So let me just rattle off a few things that I've been involved in, and I'm going to let you ask me which ones you'd like me to discuss, because when we're talking 50 years here, I don't want to go through every year here, but all right, I was involved. I led the team that did the diversity training for Mrs. Schott in '93. I was involved on the controversy of talk radio. We had a certain personality that was spewing talk that we thought was divisive and hurtful of certain groups. And so we confronted the station on that. I was involved in, actually, I'm proud to say played a leading role in the repeal of Cincinnati's anti-gay charter amendment. And we were able to successfully repeal that charter amendment in 2004. It was the only gay fairness measure to pass anywhere in the country that year. So then the Freedom Center, I'll take a moment to talk about that. That's probably the most publicized thing my organization and I have been associated with. I'll give you kind of the background on that, if that would be helpful. In the fall of '93, I was in my backyard raking leaves, and my organization was about to have its 50th anniversary, the NCCJ, in '94. And I was charged to come up with some special way we might commemorate that for the benefit of the community. I was given kind of 3 charges. Come up with something the community needs, come up with something that would be of lasting value, and something that would address the issues that we were confronting. Race relations was a hot topic then, as it has been subsequently on some during periods that we've had since then. But we had a number of police shootings, and Mr. Schott's comments really combined kind of a negative light on Cincinnati as a racist community. And I'm not saying we didn't have our racism, we did. But to be tagged as a racist city was more than fair. It was unfair. And so so I'm in my backyard raking leaves. I said, when did Cincinnati assume the high ground in race? And it eventually occurred to me that during the Underground Railroad era, Cincinnatians, not all, but a number of noteworthy Cincinnatians, Sam P. Chase, others, were very involved in the Underground Railroad. Now, I don't want you to think it was a white-driven system. It really wasn't. It was principally African-American churches providing protection and sanctuary for those escaping from Kentucky, going into our community, and then going north to Canada after the Fugitive Slave Act was passed. But so we knew that, and so I said, well, maybe that there are stories there that we can bring to light today. Stories of courage, stories of openness and concern. Are there ways that we can emulate those? I mean, are there some models, some examples from this history that can benefit Cincinnatians and by extension others? So I called a friend of mine who's the head children's librarian of the Cincinnati-Hamilton County Library System, and name is Connie Consuelo Harris, and she's a wonderful friend. And I said, Connie, can you investigate whether there are any museums dedicated to the Underground Railroad? She got back to me like 6 hours later and said, Chip, no, but at the present time, the National Park Service is studying this very subject, and one of their recommendations may be that there be a national center devoted to this marvelous history. So we connected immediately with them, and they expressed some interest. And to give you a little more of the detail, I convened, after the idea came to me, I convened a group of some of Cincinnati's, in my view, brightest and most creative leaders in our office, about 8 to 10, said, hey, we've got a major milestone coming up next year. We'd like to do something special for the community, and we'll welcome your ideas. Well, folks were saying, well, let's put an office on Fountain Square, let's do this, that, and the other. And these were some of the best and brightest in this community, and we were able to get about 10 of them together.
I have to ask if I may.
Huh?
Was John Pepper among them?
No, John, John came on in later the next year when he chaired our annual dinner, at which we announced that we were going to build the Freedom Center. I talked to John yesterday, actually. And so they came up with all these ideas, and they were good. At the end, I said, hey, I got a little something here I want to throw out. And so what do you think about us having a museum here dedicated to the Underground Railroad? Well, it was kind of uniformly panned. Oh, come on, Chip. I mean, it's... And a dear friend of mine, Dan Hurley, who many of you may know, a leading local historian, said, oh, Chip, I mean, it's filled with white mythology, blah, blah, blah. I wouldn't go down that road. Of course, we ended up hiring Dan as our first manager to run the project once it gained some traction. So after that, I was a little discouraged. I called one of my board members, and I said, well, this idea isn't going to go very far. And he said, well, Chip, have faith. And a month later, I'm down in Memphis at the Lorraine Motel, where Dr. King was assassinated. They also happened to have at that time on the premises a bus from Montgomery. And I was sitting on this bus in one of the exhibits of the museum by myself. I just happened to find myself sitting on the bus by myself. And there's an audio playing, hey, get in the back of the bus. Get in the back of the bus. You don't belong here. Your place is in the back. And I was able to feel Rosa Parks. And I was deeply moved by that. And so I got off the bus and I said to one of my colleagues, damn it, this is a good idea. I'm going to push this. So I came back to Cincinnati really inspired, fired up, ready to go. And a friend of mine by the name of Bob Castellini was my landlord. And I went to see Bob. And Bob, I think I got an idea. I think Bob is a good, tough thinker. And so we're sitting in his office. I said, Bob, what do you think of this idea? And I laid out the idea. And he said, well, Chip, I'm on a downtown council right now. We're looking for wonderful ideas to really renovate downtown. This could be a signature new addition downtown. And so that's kind of how the excitement got generated, and we raised $200,000 immediately to do a survey. We brought in the architect of the Holocaust Museum in D.C., Ralph Applebaum. We brought him to come in and do a survey and to do an assessment whether or not this is viable. Well, he did. He came back saying, you may have something here. And so in May of 1994, 30 years ago, John Pepper, a friend, was chairing the annual dinner, and Dr. Lawrence Hawkins of the University of Cincinnati took the podium and said, ladies and gentlemen, the NCCJ is going to build a museum dedicated to the Underground Railroad. And so that began a 10-year effort and $114 million to build this Freedom Center. And it was just an idea whose time had come. And we had some good people involved. Procter & Gamble put all the weight of and the leverage of their organization behind it to raise a lot of money. And we got cooperation from public officials. And it was just an amazing experience. And it was, I'll never forget it. And it was just a real privilege to be a part of that undertaking. And a lot happened. I mean, we had, this was not universally regarded as the answer. We had some African-American activists that said, what are you doing, spend all this money on a museum, when we could be using that money for equity for us and for our needs. And we couldn't really quarrel that point and argue that point. And we had Reverend Damon Lynch Jr., who was a very active member of the Freedom Center Board, and his son, Damon III, was leading some of the unrest and some of the opposition. But that was just the way it was. Today, the first year the Freedom Center opened in 2004, they had about 300,000 people come from all over the country. It was thrilling. And so that's kind of how the Freedom Center came into being. And today, for financial reasons, it's been, we were given projections of annual attendance of about 300,000. Well, the annual attendance after the first year ended up being 150. It's a special museum. This is not a kids museum, or it's not a Kings Island. It's, and you have to have an interest and appetite to learn about civil rights and what have you. So anyway, so that's that. I mean, any questions on the Freedom Center?
That's a beautiful story.
well, thanks. I don't tell it much, so yeah.
I was going to observe, I've seen a reference to it as one of the kinds of museum, which is called a museum of conscience.
Precisely, yeah.
Which is a kind of accolade that Chip has earned also. He's been called in the newspapers the conscience of Hamilton County in reference to the activities of that kind starting at that time. I'd forgotten, but the initial director you said was Dan Hurley?
Well, he was the project manager. He was contracted to help us kind of figure out the proper steps in building a museum. And yeah, so that was.
I was going to make another observation. I was told in private interviews about the evolution of the concept from Ed Rigaud that it was originally thought of as something to be a memorial with a statue, and not a museum per se, but something like they've done for Miriam Spencer in Smale Park.
Well, I guess there are a lot of interpretations. The early days. We were all, because it was such a massive undertaking. We had folks all over the map on how we should do this.
Yeah.
We were kind of granted the riverfront site, which is huge. The county gave us the space. The city gave us the air rights or whatever it was, and so that was huge. And then we couldn't just build a little small museum. We really had to have more ambition. And so it really grew. But yeah, there are a variety of ideas that were being shared. But I'll say of course, the business interests wanted something big and attractive. That's what they wanted. The historians and civil rights activists just wanted to make sure that the programming was honest, that the programming was meaningful and effective, could maybe change minds, could help folks to appreciate their individual responsibilities on the matters of race. And so it was a real confluence of a lot of different interests and perspectives that somehow came together in the Freedom Center. And so I'll just share another story with you. I think another issue that my organization, again, the NCCJ, played, we think, an important role was the repeal of Article 12. 1993 Cincinnati voters voted to deny the LGBTQ community rights to protection if they were discriminated against in the city in employment, housing, and public accommodation. They were the only group singled out for non-protection. The charter amendment said, City Council, you can't protect these folks. It was terrible. It was a black eye on the city. We lost tens, hundreds of thousands in business and convention business because of it. But a particular sector at that time was able to prevail. And we lost a lot of talent and people. And so 8 years later, my organization, again, after 8 years of this, I mean, the pain was really something. And more folks started to say, hey, we can't live with this any longer. So we quietly conducted a survey of 8 of the largest corporations in Cincinnati, quiet survey. Said, we'll promise you anonymity, but are you now recognizing your gay employees with an affinity group, for example, an interest group, a peer group? Well, we were stunned to find out that 5 of the 8 had quietly set those up. I mean, that views had changed and employers were seeing the wisdom of being open and accepting. And so we were encouraged by that. We also did some other quiet surveys. And so my board made the decision that we would take this on. And we were the only, and I'm really kind of proud to say, we were the only group to step up to lead this campaign. We worked with a group of wonderful gay activists who've been working without much help for several years. And so we teamed up with them to launch the campaign to repeal the Article 12. It was, and we eventually got a number of corporate CEOs on board supporting the campaign. We went and we learned a lot because previous campaigns to repeal anti-gay legislation around the country had been trying marketing approaches, a lot of mass media to try to change minds, try to get votes. Well, we had been advised by the Human Rights Campaign in D.C. that that approach, that strategy wasn't working. So they said, you know, if you're all really serious about this, you got to go door to door. So we recruited, 100, 200 volunteers who literally went door to door in Cincinnati homes saying, listen, I'm just here urging you to consider fairness. Do you happen to have a child or a relative who might be gay, and do you want them to lose their apartment because they're gay? Do you want them to be denied a job because they're gay? Well, that really got voters thinking and relating to the issue. And in November, 54% of the Cincinnati voters voted to repeal this. And it was, I have never felt more needed in my life. See the joy in my gay colleagues was just overwhelming. Now it's a different day and age, and we're dealing with issues related to the trans community, and that's another tough issue for folks. But that was really a gratifying thing that I had the privilege of being involved in. Now let me kind of fast forward here, and then I'll take any questions you have on any of these items. In 2000, I left the organization, NCCJ. It was then called Bridges, and that's a long story in itself. In 2011, I retired, worked for a college for a couple years in development, and then I left the college and came back, started doing some diversity work. Diversity consulting. It's now DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Consulting. And did that for a couple years. And then in 2016, a presidential candidate was really promoting a Muslim ban. And his rhetoric, if I may, was pretty divisive, many of us thought, and hurtful. And so on the strength of, I met with the head of the local Muslim community. I said, Ike, buddy, you think we need to reconvene some of the NCCJers to address this? And as a Muslim, and as a leader of the victim group, he said, yeah, we would sure welcome our Jewish and our other friends to help us, stand with us. So on the strength of one email, 35 former board members and others came back to take on Islamophobia, take on anti-Semitism, take on racism. The NCCJ had gone out of business a couple of years earlier, and so they knew that, and they knew that this issue was worthy of their attention. We're all volunteers, and so we issued 3 informational pieces on Islam that we shared with 250 community leaders across the sectors in Cincinnati. And so that kind of launched our work as Bridges of Faith Trialogue. And so at that time we were exclusively Abrahamic, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim, the Abrahamic traditions. And a year later, someone came up to us who was involved in our equation dialogues, or excuse me, our Bridges of Faith dialogues. We had those monthly. We'd talk about a key social issue, and we'd just dialogue, 30, 40 folks. And they were marvelous experience. Some of the leaders, well, most were leaders in the community. 2018, we were apprised about an event in Louisville called the Festival of Faith. I don't know if you've been to that. It's a marvelous experience where they bring in folks of a wide variety of religious traditions to give lectures and talks. They have a spin-off of that in Indianapolis. They too have a Indianapolis Festival of Faith. And so we visited both cities to learn their model and came out, we like the Indianapolis model. So in June of 2018, Cincinnati had its first Festival of Faith. We had, on the afternoon of, in late June in 2018, more than 1,000 people showed up at the Cintas Center at Xavier's campus to be with, as it turned out, 35 different faith traditions representing 14 world religions. Just imagine a trade show of religion. And everybody just talking about what they do, what they believe in. And there's no evangelizing in that room, no proselytizing, but it's just sharing who they are. And everybody essentially discovered, at the end of walking through all the aisles, really concluding that they had their tenets, their basic beliefs were almost identical. The Baha'is, the Jains, the Zoroastrians, the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Quakers, all the Jews, Muslims, Christians. That was the kind of the universal conclusion that folks had, having the exposure to all these people. And we'll show you a video of that to give you a taste of it here in a minute. Maybe we should probably interrupt my prattling on here to let you see that. And then I'll take maybe some other. But again, if you have any other matters that you'd like me to share, I'd be happy to. But can we show the video now?
Oh, Chip, before you do that,
Yeah.
I have one question.
Sure.
On the festival
Yeah.
inclusion. I have, on business trips, become acquainted with Shintoism.
Right.
The
That's a group of limited numbers here. And
I wonder.
we've tried to reach out to them, but we haven't been able to bring them in yet. But we love Native American, indigenous folks. They've been involved in the festival. And with the Shintos and the Taoists, we have not been able to bring in. So if anybody has any contacts, let us know. We'd love to welcome them into the festival. Now, if you're not ready, let me just update you on the recent work. After the festival, we are no longer three traditions, which is really the basis of the word trialogue. So we had to change our name. So we became Equation, Equality, Spirituality, and Inclusion, a made up name. And that's who we are now, Equation. And also in 2018, hate crimes were on the rise around the country and in Cincinnati. So we created the Cincinnati Regional Coalition Against Hate to make sure that victims had ready-made allies right there to help them, to give them any relief, help they needed, to inform the community. We work closely with the Hamilton County Police Chiefs Association in setting up the coalition. So fast forward, and so moving on 2 more years, after the George Floyd tragedy, I think we observed that all these key sectors were coming forward with all these promises of pledges of unprecedented support to remediate the racial inequities in society. Well, some didn't follow through on that, but we weren't seeing their faith communities coming forward in any real obvious, pronounced way. So we created a program for that purpose. And it's called A Mighty Stream, after the famous quote from Amos. And we have 35 organizations representing 9 different religions who are participating in what we call sacred activism. Our hope is to get folks out of the comfort of their pews and going beyond just righteous thinking and kind sentiments to actually advocating for the remediation of inequities in these major 7 quality of life sectors: healthcare, criminal legal, housing, employment, et cetera, environment. And so we have now, so we do that through what we call sacred activism. It's social activism, social action with a faith basis. So, and then the most recent thing to bring you up to date is Faith Communities Go Green, our 3rd thrust today, where we're taking on environmental justice. Working with Green Umbrella, we are now involving houses of worship. We have over 50 now who are working to improve the structure of their facility to make them more environmentally friendly, to work on their own personal habits and lifestyle changes. The third is to advocate for public policies that serve the environment. And so last count we had 56 houses of worship with green teams, we call them, and they're working on this. So that's the quick rundown equation in the last few years. So, all right, here's the video.
Living our mission every day through compassion and collective action. We engage people of all faiths to discover their shared humanity and spirituality and to work together for an inclusive and just and equitable community for everyone.
Equation does a number of things, but the inspiration is to do things that help us foster harmony and equity and peace in all of our different faith traditions.
It's also like just a way for us to see that we're not all alone. We're all kind of in this together, you know?
Things that unite us is more than the things that divides us.
Equation is a wonderful group of people that sponsor events like today, the Festival of Faiths.
Because we did not know each other. Right. We did not have any clue about who each of us was. That's right. We came together and through this planning process have learned to work together. That's right. And have become really close.
The equation has 3 major thrusts. The first one is the Festival of Faith. Second major thrust is one that calls for all these faith traditions to be social activists, and that's the Mighty Stream Racial Justice Initiative. Our most recent program is Faith Communities Go Green, a program that we do in collaboration with Green Umbrella.
Equation's mission is, all about interfaith and bringing different faith communities together so they can better understand and learn from each other.
Injustice against one of us is injustice against all of us, and we fight that through compassion and action. And that is what Equation is all about, compassion and action.
And I'm here with a proclamation, but I love this festival. Our community is so incredibly proud of all the organizers and proud of all the diverse faith traditions.
The festival is really our portal through which all these faith communities come into our civic arena. Today, it attracted over 2,000 people in a span of 4 hours. The latest count is 37 different faith traditions encompassing 14 world religions. And we're thrilled to have all these traditions under our tent.
I love how every year at the Festival of Faiths, they put the kids area front and center. So as soon as you come in the door, there's some youthful energy.
I think it's important because you get to have a wider view of the world and not just think about what your little bubble of what you believe and everything.
It's been really interesting to learn more about the other faiths and how similar and how different they are from our faith.
A mighty stream was started in the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd. we felt the spiritual reawakening of our moral imperative to respond to injustice as people of faith.
The name of A Mighty Stream was inspired by the well-known biblical passage from the Book of Amos, popularized by Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
Only in the faith community can you affect change towards taking care of our planet.
Every sacred text has that. They all call for us to be stewards of creation.
As many of you know, I'm half Tibetan and half Indian, and that makes me half Tibetan Buddhist and half Sikh. It is absolutely true that the strength of our community right now and into the future is our diversity.
Communities like ours, I mean, you know, for several decades now, we've been so used to reactive responses after an incident or a hate crime or an act of discrimination, whereas events like this is a place where we can come together, share our stories on our terms, share who we are the way we want to, and that goes so much further than doing reactive work.
Isn't it wonderful? No matter what faith you come together and smile together.
And when faith people work for the common good, then we all benefit.
Are there any questions that I can answer at this point? Okay, yes.
In all of these movements you're talking about, were the groups sprung up in the 70s, I think, on going into firms and presenting diversity training? Were they a part of this? Thinking exclusively of Merlin Code.
I knew Merlin. Yeah, I knew Merlin and Pat. And we were, actually my group was one of the first to do diversity training. 1989, I got a call from a downtown hotel who said, listen, we've hired all these really wonderful young ladies from Miami University and we've hired all these wonderful young ladies from Miami University who have great personalities to work at our hotel, but they haven't had much exposure to persons who are different from them. This is, 30 years ago or more. And so we were called in to conduct diversity training, as it was called then, for about 30 or 40 of their employees of the hotel. That led to getting more jobs, and that's frankly what led to us being selected by Major League Baseball to do the training for Mrs. Schott and the front office staff in '93. That was an experience, and we were selected by Bill White, who was president of the National League back then. And I recall him saying, Chip, can't you just run her through some sort of a process and get her the thinking better about this stuff? I said, no. So we really need to meet with all her front office staff. That's the only way to get the whole organization committed to openness and inclusion and fairness. So we ended up conducting 9 trainings, and we called them innings. And Mrs. Schott was in every one. And every once in a while I said, Mr. Schott, you can't smoke in here. But Mrs. Schott, I think, got an unfair rap. I'm not saying what she did was right at all. Her language, she should have been more responsible in her language and her characterization. But she was old school, and she thought that behavior was more important than words. Well, she learned that words are pretty important, especially when you have a public responsibility. So I said to Mrs. Schott when I first met with her, I said, Mrs. Schott, we're not here to hurt you. We're not here to embarrass you. We're here to give you some tools that will help you to avoid what you're in now, and to help the team move forward and your image, et cetera. And so she went through the training a little bit begrudgingly, because but she did. And at the end of the training, I went to see her and I said, Mrs. Schott, how'd it go? No, it was okay. It was okay. And she said, I got something for you. And so At the end of our short meeting, she goes over and pulls out a couple of bags of souvenirs that she had personally put together for my twin daughters. And I just...
Put them together?
Yeah. Yeah, she had a couple of bags of souvenirs, oh, forgive me, that she had assembled and given to me as gifts for my twin daughters.
Oh.
And I just said, Mrs. Schott, so gracious of you to do that, you know. And so she was a lot more than the media gave her credit for, sadly. And she wasn't perfect. None of us is. But anyway, are you getting close? All right, you got the equation?
I don't even have an internet connection to here now.
Oh. Okay. All right. Well.
You'll have to edit it in
Yeah.
later. We can always edit it in later.
Okay. Or I'll. Yeah. I don't know if I can get that. Well, anyway, I'll send that to you. Then you can, if you'll follow. It's a.
We're going to be on the program.
Oh. Okay. All right. Okay.
Video at the studio.
Okay. All right. So. Okay, well, I'm sorry. It was a lot more entertaining than I had been, so I apologize for not being able to give you that. Any questions that you have about the work that we have done? And I will say that the most recent challenge has been October 7th. In the aftermath of 9/11, about a year later, what had been a very healthy relationship between local Jews and Muslims was really strained. And so we noticed that the social distance had developed. So we convened 6 Muslim couples to meet with 6 Jewish couples in their homes. These were leaders of their respective communities. And over the course of 3 or 4 years of meeting every other month over food, they got to respect one another, and got to the point that one of the Jewish women had a serious bout with cancer and had significant surgery. The first couple to greet her the morning after was the Muslim couple to see how she was doing. And I know these, and it was just, and that left such an indelible impression of goodwill on all those who heard that story. And so relations really developed from 2003 to October 7th. And all of these Jews and Muslims and now other traditions working closely together with a degree of harmony and respect. And then October 7th hit, and to our great surprise and disappointment, our Jewish and Muslim friends suddenly found some considerable difference in the way they perceived that part of the world. And it was, I mean, in my organization, that my board is half Jewish and half Muslim. I mean, half the board is one or the other. And it was the most difficult terrain that we have had to cover in my 50 years, to be honest with you. And so we felt like, as the leading interfaith group, we had to do something. So we got a rabbi and a leading Muslim to author an initial piece. And then we issued another statement to the media that was, I've got here, that was the Inquirer featured, just focusing on local relations, focusing on the profound suffering and pain both groups have experienced. Yeah, oh yeah. So what I brought are just a couple of things, modest things I wrote regarding the opening of the Freedom Center. I was asked to write something for the Inquirer the day it opened, so I've given you that, and then some remarks I gave on the evening of the opening. My wife is still upset that I didn't introduce her to Oprah. Honey, Oprah was 2 tables away and you didn't introduce her. So, and then The final piece is the piece that appeared in the Inquirer a couple, 3 months ago on the Israel-Hamas conflict. And the equation's views on how we should look upon that. And so that's what Brendan is sharing with you now. So thank you all. We'll let this run and you leave when you need to. It's been a pleasure. Okay, thank you.